Here is the Benny.
Presenting Benny Goodman and his music.
All right, there we go. Hey, everybody. Hey, Eileen. Hey, Eric. Hey, Betsy. Hey, Kathleen over on the YouTube, and Donna, Gladys, Larry, Jennifer. Hey, everybody. Hey, Mary.
Benny Goodman, ladies and gentlemen, the man with the torrid clarinet and the even more torrid band who purveys assorted rhythms, all danceable, in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago. And first of all, one of
Hey,
Irving
Rob,
Berlin's
Lori,
greatest
Linda.
hits, Blue Sky.
Hey, Dad. Gonna try a Corpse Reviver. I don't know what kind of language they use if they did that kind of thing anymore. Hey, Laura, Timothy, Becky, Casey, Kurt, Doreen, Mary, all you guys and dolls. You're all a bunch of crazy guys and dolls, and those beyond the binary. Hey, Sherry and Marita. Hey, Katie. I had the Benny up a little loud there. Evening, Jean. Hey, Dave and Barb. Hey, Mary Rose and June. Hey, Jean. Hey, Cheryl. Hey, everybody. Susan, no, I didn't see that yet. Oh, and here, look who's just heard the music and come in from his long day sitting on a suitcase. Hey, Jerry. Hey, Margaret. Hey, Gina. Hey, Betsy. Hey, Rob. Hey, Ava. And hi, Skylar. Hey, Mom. Hey, Mike. Good meeting you, too. So I had to walk away. That guy kind of pulled me away from the Civil War roundtable. Hey, Kathleen. Hey, Bridget. Hey, Katie. Hey, Steve. Hey, Miles. Yeah. Sit up like this, huh? Sit like this? Mm-hmm. Hey, Phil. Hey, Bridget. Oh, hey, MJ. Hope your new knee's working out. Hey, Jess, Emily, Margaret. Glad to have you back then, Margaret. Hey, Octavio. Hey, Katie. Hey, Laura. Hey, Vicky. Hey, Chandra. I have had a busy day indeed, yes. Today I went through an old novel that has been sitting in my drawer for a long time. So when I was trying to get Simon & Schuster to put out when they decided to do Just Kill Me instead. Maybe I'll just toss it up on Amazon or something. And thanks, Christine. Yeah, sorry I got pulled away by the Civil War Roundtable guys. It's a historian thing. I don't reenactors. I don't generally mess with. They should let the Union use live ammo, though. Nancy, I'm all right today. Rodney, I'm all right today. Hey, Ellen. I wanted to make sure all of you, while we're looking at adorable stuff, did you all see, there's this great picture of Grandma Belle playing in a box. I thought I'd just put that up there. I'll just leave that up there. It's one of the better pictures ever taken. I'll just leave that there. I mean, we all love the Ransomar Cable House, right? But Belle in a box. Hey, Amy. Yes, Susan, there's a whole Ray Bradbury story about this, you know. Simplify, Gary. Hey, Tracy. Hey, Carol. No stars above you to say again I love you with all my heart. Because if you're not careful, like every Civil War event turns out like that. Anytime I meet other Civil War people, I gotta kind of feel them out for a minute, just make sure they're not. Well, it wasn't just about slavery type. So sure, there was also stupidity.
Benny Goodman goes way back and gets a lot of rhythm out of Walk, Jenny, Walk. Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
Hey, Ed. Well, hey, Miles. Climbing up my back. Evening, Susan. All the Mysterians out there. Well, speaking of that, next week's virtual tour is going to be Treason, the Chicago Insurrection Plot from 1864. One of my favorite subjects, one that I don't think has really been covered nearly enough. Which might mean there's a book in it. I don't know, I'm talking to a new publisher that I think might be good for these kind of niche things that I do, you know. Yeah, Susan, we'll talk about this one. This is the Ransomar Cable Mansion. Hey, euphonium section. Welcome along, everybody. I love so much about this building. The tall, skinny chimneys, the brickwork, the Richardsonian Romanesque touches. Even the color is cool. And frankly, you know, that putty color could come off as very bland, but somehow in the stone that you would normally expect to be gray, I guess, it works. We'll let Benny Goodman do one more tune.
And they all loved it. They all loved those fast
when
moving
they started
by
dropping
Benny
it.
Goodman. And now another one just in the same vein, Rosetta.
While Miles reposes on the desk, sitting on all the junk mail over here. Rodney, I am on some Buffalo Trace tonight. Buffalo Trace and just a little bit of really hot water. Laura, Heather, to the best of my knowledge, that is the color of the stone. From some particular quarry. And that is a patina up top, yes. They might have touched it up with some paint by now, though. They probably wouldn't admit to it, but they might have done it. Hey, Elizabeth in Oak Park. We're letting Benny Goodman finish up one more tune, then we will get started here properly. 93 in Arizona. You just hang on to that. You know what's bugging me right now is this pillow. The pillow is creating like a white spot over my shoulder that just wasn't working. Of course, now I got stuff on the table. Hey, Diane. Hey, Maureen. Hey, Adrian. Washington Heights. Hey, Susan and Beth. 65 in Dallas isn't too bad. Thanks. Well, Benny's wrapping up. Let's put up this picture one more time. Bell in a box.
Music by Benny Goodman.
All right, that is Benny Goodman coming to you live from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. And with that, everybody, I think it is time that we get started. Welcome along, ladies and gentlemen. I am Adam for Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for going on 20 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out, mostly written, well, a few of them written with help from Miles here. I'm on the History Channel and the Travel Channel all the time. I am incredibly famous. You should definitely pay attention to whatever I say. Among my books are Mysterious Chicago, the book, now in audio form, to my great surprise. H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, also an audio book, but I knew that one was coming. Ghosts of Chicago, now a rare collector's item. I think Bob's copy is on its way. Just Kill Me, a novel about a ghost tour guide who makes places more haunted by killing people at them. The Smart Alex Guide to American History, Murder Maps USA, and Graceland Cemetery, new from where we were today for the mini tour, newer from University of Illinois Press. And also coming up in the next month or so, there may be one that I just kind of toss up on Kindle called I Beat Up Charles Dickens. This is one that I wrote years ago. It's just been sitting in my drawer for a long time. I wrote it knowing that it had to take place on December 30th of 2017. And then if it came out like 6 months after that, it would seem dated and stuff people didn't want to talk about anymore. But now I guess it's been long enough that maybe I can actually put this up. But if you're on the Patreon, I'll make sure there's a special deal for the Patreon to get a copy of that. But all right, so welcome along, everybody. Today we are going to be talking about mansions and mysteries in River North. This is the neighborhood just above the Loop, just on the other side of the river, just north of the river from the Loop. That's why they get to call it River North. It's a very good name, very clever and informative. And Martha, no, the audiobooks are not read by me. I'd be happy to do it, but they've never asked me to. All right. We will start out here on Erie Street, or Huron Street. A lot of the Great Lake streets are named here in River North. And you can still see, you get a lot of tourist traps here. It's really like the bro capital of Chicago these days. But mixed into it are all these old mansions that are still standing from back in the old days. But what we really want to talk about here is the mansion that used to be to the left, where this postmodern international style school building is now. We can line it up a little bit. We'll match it up here. This is 6 East Huron. And at 8 East Huron, there used to be this place like this with that neat mansard roof style. And if you look here, I've kind of got it lined up. You can see the building next door at 6. Then next one over would be the one in question. This, in the 1960s, was the home of Finders Incorporated. Finders Incorporated were the people who could find anything. I've never been entirely clear how much of this was serious and how much of it was kind of a put-on because it was run by comedians. But the idea here was if you were filming a commercial and needed a chimpanzee who could play Monopoly, you call Finders. They'd know a guy. If you read something about how it was a tradition in some cultures to give your lover a black bear tooth on your wedding day, and you decided you needed a black bear tooth, Finders Incorporated would find you a black bear tooth. Anything you needed. Should you need, say, a violin stuffed with Oscar Mayer hot dogs, they could arrange that. I'm guessing they had to say the phrase, I know a guy, over and over and over again. Now, I say that this is... I'm not really clear just how much of this was really serious and how much of it was a put-on, because it was started by a bunch of comedians. Now, here is Barry Ziggy Stone setting this place up with help from Del Close. Del Close was a comedian, started the Improv Olympics. These are all like Second City veterans. Ziggy Stone was known for his comedy stylings and his pranks very early on. Like, if you would have got invited to a Ziggy Stone party, packed for 3 days. You never knew what it was going to be. One time it was going to be a party on the train. It turned out that they were going clear across the train, convincing people that a vote for Teddy Roosevelt was a vote for progress. This was in the 1960s, several decades after Teddy Roosevelt was dead. But he came up with the idea to start Finders Incorporated here on Huron Street, back when you could get these townhouses for a song, and started acquiring things for people such as a monkey who could play Monopoly. They also had a series of catalogs because they always ended up with things that they would have to buy in a set if they wanted the one particular thing. So they ended up, at one point, there was this a bust that they said that they couldn't figure out exactly who it was. So they put it up for sale. Is it President Garfield? That does not look like President Garfield. Is it Sigmund Freud? Louis Pasteur? Could be either of those guys. I kind of thought it might be Martin Ryerson. And no, he had a longer beard than that, and a little more of a receding hairline. So this could be anybody. It might have been built for somebody's tomb. It might have been built to go inside of somebody's mausoleum. So I've never been entirely clear. Now, when I first found out about this, I thought this is a children's book waiting to happen. There's an entire draft of a book about this place, or based on this. But I immediately tracked down Ziggy Stone. He's now living in California doing video editing. I got him on the phone, but he wasn't really that talkative. I really wanted to find some of the Finders catalogs. And at the time, he said I might have some in storage someplace, but he kind of seemed like he thought I was from the IRS. I mean, I was asking as many questions as I could, but he kind of wondered, like, who is this guy? What's he on about? What's he doing? So we talked for a few minutes, and that was about it. But still, when I tell my comedy friends that I talked to Ziggy Stone, they tend to get very excited about this. But just around the corner from Finders Incorporated in that old mansion stands the St. James Church, St. James Episcopal, which has been on this location since before the Great Chicago Fire. Now, the building has been rebuilt. It is often said that you can see scorch marks from the Great Chicago Fire up towards the top. Let's see how much I can scroll here. How high up? Nah, not higher than this. Well, it's often said there are scorch marks up there, but I've seen pictures of the cathedral of the tower from right after the Great Chicago Fire, the part that didn't burn. There weren't any scorch marks right after the fire, so they would have come in more recently than that. But this place was mostly rebuilt after the Great Chicago Fire burned it down, but before that it had been standing all through the Civil War. In fact, Abraham Lincoln came here for services one day in late 1860, which was very unusual. Lincoln was, I always say I think he would probably check the spiritual but not religious box. He was not really a church-going guy just in general. But one thing they did manage to save from the inside, we'll just step inside here, was the old altar and Civil War memorial. This is from the old pre-fire church. So this is a pre-fire relic here in Chicago. And here they list a bit of some Lincoln speeches commemorating the time that he stayed here, and also list the names of members of the congregation who did not survive the war, of which there were quite a few, really. Here's another shot of it. One of the names that appears on here is the guy that we talked about today on the morning mini tour when we went to visit his grave, a guy by the name of Captain Lucius Larrabee, who ended up joining a New York regiment. He had been with the famous Zouaves drill team here in Chicago in the 1850s and 1860s. My favorite anecdote about him is the story that after he needed a finger amputated, they brought over the ether, and he said, no, I was a Zouave, just cut it off. So they did, and he sat there for what I'm guessing was a very long second before saying, all right, next time I will use the anesthesia. Unfortunately, there was not a next time for him. Well, I should say fortunately, except that the reason is not that he never needed another amputation. He was killed in the Battle of Gettysburg. There were just a handful of Chicagoans who died at Gettysburg. He was one of them. He was killed at Little Round Top. He had had premonitions the night before. He gave some of his personal effects to one of his army buddies and said, if something happens to me, here's a letter and here's all of my stuff. I don't want to get into anything paranormal about this. I feel like a lot of people probably had premonitions because you're about to go into a battle. Same reason people would have premonitions before going on a ship that said that it was unsinkable. A lot of people probably did. Should be noted that the captain did not swear when he gave them the finger. Brilliant, Rob. Brilliant. Well, let's go around the corner. I know a lot of you are eyeballing this place. This magnificent mansion at 25 East Erie, just east of State Street. This is the Ransom R. Cable Mansion. Tucked away among, like, all of these tourist traps, really. The Hard Rock Cafe, the old Rainforest Cafe, the Rock and Roll McDonald's, various nightclubs, all of the Dude Bros, and then this. Well, even the coach house back there is just magnificent. Much nicer than my house, anyway. Gorgeous fountains in the back. Let's just take a look on the inside there. You can see some of the statues they've got in. Ransom R. Cable. Now, Ransom R. Cable was the president of the Rock Island and Pacific Railroad. A lot of these giant mansions were railroad guys. This is the guy who got Congress to authorize a new bridge over the Mississippi from Davenport to Rock Island. I've driven over a bridge there many times myself. But, you know, it's the kind of thing I tend not to make that big of a deal about, like railroad president. Got a guy to authorize a bridge over the Mississippi. If he didn't, somebody else would have. But let's give him some credit for building a magnificent house here. Anyway, this was designed by Henry Ives Cobb, a guy who comes up quite a bit in these sort of things. He built a lot of the mansions around here. Though this one was built in the style of Henry Hobson Richardson. It's a style called Richardsonian Romanesque. Ives was a very good copier of him. Did a lot of fantastic stuff on his own, too. Now, in the 1990s, for a long time, this place was a funeral home. After Ransom R. Cable died, it became the John Carroll Funeral Home for a number of years. One of the Cardinals of Chicago had his funeral out of here. One of the victims of the lipstick killer in the late 1940s had her funeral here. Now, the lipstick killer is one that I don't normally cover. It's a little bit out of the time frame that I usually work in. It's a little too recent for me. In fact, he just died a few years ago. But eventually he was taken over by Richard Dreyhouse, who used as the headquarters of his finance company. Now, this I like. This is the kind of place that finance people ought to be in, instead of these gray, faceless, modernist buildings they tend to be in. But that's just the kind of guy Richard was. He's the kind of guy who, like, turned 72 and threw himself a James Bond-themed birthday party. Passed away just a couple of years ago, right while on the day that I was talking about him on a tour. It's kind of a curse, I suppose. Well, let's just take a look at this place from across the street. He was also very good at restoring buildings. It was something that was a real passion for him. Move in. Here's a little shot of the courtyard. And often you can spot when you're at a building that he was running, you'll see actual kerosene lights flickering around on the outside. You see quite a bit of them out in the Gold Coast. Now, recently I had dinner with someone who knew him a little. They talked to me a bit about the fact that they're planning a mausoleum for him at Graceland, but there weren't really plans in place for it, so it's probably going to be a while. There's probably going to be a lot of fighting and competing designs. But he hadn't really made plans for his death. He didn't have a will. The friend that I met said, well, you see, Richard just didn't realize he was going to die. And I don't mean he didn't realize he was going to die this year, just in general. Another shot of the courtyard there, this magnificent fountain. I love it when they carve faces onto stuff, personally. I mean, some people think that's kind of old-fashioned or maybe too representational, I don't know, but I think faces make stuff look neat. Maybe it just reminds me of the Care Bears in the Land Without Feelings, where the face fountains spit on people and then insult them a little bit. Until the Care Bears show up. But let's just go across the corner here. We're not done with Richard yet. This is another of his buildings that he operated. In fact, this one he turned into a museum. This is the old Samuel Mayo Nickerson mansion. S.M. Nickerson. He was a bank guy, but this place eventually, after it was a bank place, became owned by Mr. Fisher, Lucius Fisher, who owned a paper company and has this magnificent columbarium on the banks of the pond at Graceland Cemetery. You can see the keyhole to it is underneath the sleeve. And is also the namesake of the Fisher Building, designed by Charles Bowler Atwood for the Daniel Burnham Company. But now Richard has turned this one into a museum, the Dreyhouse Museum, where they've tried to restore it as much as they could. Like, this is a vintage shot of the main hall, and here's how it looks today. But also, take a look for a second here at this building next door. One of the ghost tour companies I was working for, the boss was always saying, we gotta make up a story about that building, because it looks so cool. For one thing, it looked exactly like the Iroquois Theater, famously haunted. But this is the Murphy Memorial Building. It used to be a part of the old medical college. Now, there is an old Tribune article, from an early Tribune article about different old ghost stories in Chicago. One of them talked about a place somewhere on Erie Street. They didn't specify exactly where on Erie Street, but they said that you could hear the sound of bodies being delivered to a place that was once used by the old medical college. They don't specify what it was, but this would be a pretty good guess. However, there's another place on Erie Street with a history about body delivery that could also be where it's coming from. A little further west on Erie Street is Flare House. Now, Flare House is this little townhouse here that was built back in 1883 for a guy named Marcus Devine, who was a milk dealer. Now, it sold to an ad agency in 1964. I've been saying that these places went for a song in the 1960s. This place sold in 1964 for $20,000. But we're going to go back a little bit further in history to the time before Flare House was there and operated by a milk dealer. Back in 1875, the city had changed the laws saying that medical schools would be given all the bodies they needed. Bodies that were bound for the Potter's Field would first go to the medical colleges. This was supposed to cut back on the problem of grave robbing in the city. But there was still a market for grave robbing in places like Ann Arbor and Iowa City. So they would just steal the bodies here, put them into barrels labeled poultry or something, and send them off to be Ann Arbor or Iowa City. Before they could move them, though, they were being stashed in a barn that stood right about where this alley is now. Now, within this alley, they eventually found the bodies. They made a really big deal about the lovely naked body that they had found, the nude form of a beautiful woman whose staring eyes made a gorgon horror of the face that in life had been comely and attractive. It was very amusing for me to find that particular article, because it is right next door to the Hooters, which has claimed to be haunted for a number of years. People who work, they say that they hear voices, they hear weird things coming out of the basement. And the fact that this was a stash place for grave robbers is about the best backstory they have heard on it. Now, for the longest time, they would just say something about, well, maybe the mob used to have meetings there, or it was in the path of the Great Chicago Fire. When I found this article, I put that on Twitter, and Hooters retweeted me. Real claim to fame there. But this is the alley. I did go out there with Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me brought me out there one time to talk about the ghost, but they kept asking me, like, who's with us right now? Like, they kind of wanted me to be a lot more ooky spooky than I was. I was like, I don't know. Do you see anybody here with us right now? And here, this was initially, the body they found was said one to be frozen to death, but eventually they found it as a ghastly array. The bodies recovered from the captured resurrectionist. Thriving business carried on in the horrid traffic. Receipts for expressed packages shipped to medical colleges. The coroner's inquiry develops but little new information. And then, since we're at Hooters after all, the first line of the article is hard and stiff. There lay upon the next slab the naked form of a beautiful woman. Let's move up around the corner here. Here's the old Jekyll and Hyde Club that then became like the ESPN Club. Among other things. But there is just this incredible building at 650 North Dearborn. This at one point, well, there's a few different things we can see around here. We'll go in a little closer. First, we got the psychic operating out of this Italianate townhouse to the next door. A place telling you to chill. But this was the old Hotel Raleigh at 648, at 650. It said 648 back then. They kind of go fast and loose with where on the grid they are exactly down to a couple of numbers. But this place back in the day, as you can see, 1913, was renting for 75 cents to $2 a day, $3.50 to $8 per week. 5-minute walk to the Loop. Furnished outside rooms, hot and cold running water, fancy elevator and bellboy service day and night. Now, one of the people who lived in a building right about here back in the 1880s, right where this green one is now, was a guy by the name of Charles Guiteau. An Illinois man who moved to Chicago, cheated his way through the bar exam, and became a fake lawyer for a while, with very little success. For a while, he had moved out to upstate New York to join the Oneida Colony, who was a free love colony. They believed that anybody can be in love with anyone at any time. They had to revise that a little after they met Charles Guiteau. They found this guy completely unlovable. He moved back to Chicago and started just doing speeches about that he just ripped off from the Oneida Colony, really. Then decided to finally, when he had failed as a fake preacher, failed as a fake lawyer, failed as a free lover, he decided he would go for the last refuge of a scoundrel: politics. He worked to get James Garfield elected, thought that he was going to be named consul to Paris for reasons entirely unclear, and when he was not named consul to Paris, decided to get revenge by assassinating the president. Here we have just a little bit of a thing about him operating out of this address. It was a little bit different then. But people around the neighborhood remembered him going around preaching at the time. So he would have failed as an assassin, too. He shot President Garfield, wouldn't have quite killed him, except that Garfield had these really incompetent doctors. They kept trying to get the bullet out of him, but instead they would poke him in the liver instead. Very few people have touched a sitting president's liver. Alexander Graham Bell, the telephone inventor, showed up with a metal detector to try to find it, but the fact that the bed that he was on was made of metal kind of screwed things up a little bit. So eventually, after a couple of months, President Garfield died. Guiteau was eventually hanged for it, though just about everybody who examined him said that he had to be insane. If he had assassinated anybody else, they probably would have put him in an asylum. But eventually he was hanged, went to his grave singing a song he had written called "I Am Going to the Lordy." And this is Garfield's tomb that we have been to. There's actually a fresco of him on the deathbed being poked in the liver on the tomb at Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland. Now, I went to check this out a few years ago. There had been a small item in the paper that somebody had broken into this place. They had broken into the tomb and stolen a set of commemorative Garfield spoons. Now, these were not fancy spoons. Like, I went around here someplace. They sell for like $1 on eBay. But somebody had stolen a set of about a dozen of them, valued at approximately $12, and this I just had to see for myself, so I had a theory about who it might have been. Now, Remember I said earlier that Charles Guiteau was involved with the Oneida Colony. Later, he had a lawsuit going out with him. It was still outstanding at the time of his death. The Oneida Colony is still around, only you know what they do now instead of free love? They make silverware. Spoons. So this was my theory. It was the ghost of Charles Guiteau getting his revenge on the Oneidas. They thought that was hilarious at the tombs. I was like strutting, or he was telling the docent was telling everybody that theory. Like, I'm the funniest man in the cemetery. But I think that they missed out on the real prize here. The real prize being there's a small box of memorabilia of Garfield stuff set up by his sarcophagus, including Garfield brand laxative tea. You have to ask yourself, when you die, will they manufacture a laxative tea with your face on the box? If not, what can you do to make this happen? I'm working towards that myself right now. Let's just move next door. You might remember earlier I talked about the style Richardsonian Romanesque. Well, here's another example of it. This is in a color that I picture more commonly for that kind of style. Maybe for no particular reason. But once again, this is a Richardsonian Romanesque, but designed by Henry Ives Cobb, not by Richardson himself. But this is best known around Chicago probably to this day as the Excalibur Club, as it was for a long time. But up above it, you can still see these old historical frescoes. So this was originally the first Chicago History Museum back in the day. Now, one story that they would tell you in there, they used to have ghosts. They talked about it being haunted there a lot. The employees there definitely thought that it was haunted. They could never quite come up with a story that held up to fact-checking about why. Like, they love to say all the bodies from the Eastland disaster were taken there. Not a single one of them actually was. One theory is that somebody saw a picture that said courtesy of Chicago History Society and thought that must be where the bodies were, not who provided the picture. But they had like a magic show where they would say in particular, the place once held the bones of an early settler named Jean Lalime. Their version of the story was that the bones burned up in the Great Chicago Fire. Definitely not true. In fact, well, John Lalime was an early settler. He and John Kinsey were a couple of the first two non-native settlers. Eventually, John Kinsey killed Jean Lalime, in which one witness described as a perfect assassination. They eventually decided it was self-defense, probably just so as not to have to bother with a hanging. But the body was buried a little ways over, about where the Jazz Record Bar would eventually be. Then in the 1890s, they were doing some construction there, digging up, and found this little box with some bones in it. And at first, the workers were all having a good laugh about this. There were even stories in the papers that kids were using the skull as a ball for playing kick the can. But some guy came up, wait, you can't do that, gathered up all the bones into a box, and decided based on some interviews that these were probably the bones of Jean Lalime, and presented them as a gift to the Chicago Historical Society, who actually had them on display inside of this building for a while. Now, they definitely did not burn up in the Great Chicago Fire. They weren't found until well after the Great Chicago Fire, and furthermore, the Chicago History Museum still has them. They don't keep them on display anymore. They're kept in off-site storage someplace, though they're occasionally brought in for measuring and photographing, but they've still got them. They're not 100% sure it's really Jean Lalime, so they're kind of cagey about it. It could be a Potawatomi grave, in which case it would be subject to reburial under the Native American Grave Repatriation Act. But as far as anybody knows, as far as the best information, this is one of our early settlers, Jean Lalime. And let's go around the corner from there. Oh no, what's happened here? There we go. We also talked a bit about Judge Lambert Tree and his father-in-law, H.H. McGee, who had a house right here where this building is during the Great Chicago Fire. And at the time, it was surrounded by a lot of yard space, so a lot of people fleeing from the Loop thought, hey, this is the place we can stash our valuables. The fire's not going to reach this house. There's all this yard around it. So for a while, it was kind of the safe house. Everybody was just hanging out there until the fire did reach, in which case everybody had to scatter. I'll also just point out briefly, in the back, you can see the trapezoid-shaped Hancock building, which, as I understand it, was where Jerry Springer lived for a while. R.I.P. there, Jerry. Let's move in a little closer. Eventually, Judge Lambert Tree inherited the land, and he and his wife built Tree Studios here. Tree Studios became like an artist colony. There's a little expansion to it there where it says Metropolitan Capital. It's definitely not that artsy there now. But it still has the old sign up for studio building. Here's Judge Lambert Tree himself, rocking an excellent stash. I just like picture this guy. The time has come to talk of many things, of ships and shoes and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings. Now, this is a drawing made by a kid named Justin who was with the Tree family as they fled from the Great Chicago Fire, taking with him his pet goat. This is Mr. Stevens. This was originally the H.H. McGee Mausoleum at Graceland Cemetery, until Judge Tree sold it off to the Stevens family, had everybody reburied by the pond. But then one day, while the artists were living in the place, one day somebody dropped off a baby on the doorstep. People dropping off babies all sorts of places was very common back then. So the artists decided, hey, can we keep him? Initially, they said they were going to call him Baby Rembrandt, but then they shortened it down to James Vincent Whistler. And for a while, they said, we're going to raise him in the colony. We will raise him to be an artist. Eventually, someone did adopt him. I've never really found out exactly what happened to little Baby Rembrandt. One of those outstanding mysteries, and we've always got to have a few of those. What is he drawing? That's definitely a castle. Yeah, it's a futuristic silo. As Lillian Colley would have said. Let's move over here. The old Lowry's Steakhouse, which closed just recently, which was built into the remains of the old Leander Hamilton McCormick mansion. We can see a little picture. This is the old Leander mansion here. You can about line up where it would have been. Well, Leander Hamilton McCormick was one of the sons of the McCormick brothers who moved here in the 1850s, having found that marketing farm labor-saving equipment in their native Southland was not exactly profitable. They had invented the mechanical reaper. Exactly which of them invented it depended on who you believed. They all hated each other's guts and fought over this for years. But you can see just a little bit of it still left. On the inside, at one point, it was another building that had an entire puppet theater on the inside. Now, the steakhouse that was operating out of there for many years just closed down, and specifically they decided when there were Black Lives Matter protests in the streets, that it was time to close up. Tells us what I think of them. But it actually fits in well with old Leander Hamilton McCormick, who wrote a whole book called Characterology, an Exact Science. Now here he started with phrenology, the idea that you can tell a lot about a person by the shape and the bumps and ridges on their skull, and expanded that to include things like skin color. You can probably guess where he's going with this. Kind of not all of the McCormick children were like this. Quite a few of them, in fact, were not. But quite a few of them were chips off of the old block. His dad, Leander, lived right across the corner. A number of them lived around here, and in fact, now there's occasionally talk of saying they should officially call it the McCormickville Historic District, because people used to call it McCormickville. People did not, in fact, used to call it McCormickville. It's like a lot of neighborhood designations like Bricktown and Beer Baron Row. There's no evidence that anybody actually used those terms until like the 1990s. But this was Leander's mansion. He was the brother of Cyrus McCormick. Became a very good friend of Robert E. Lee after the war, after really openly hoping that the South would win. Here he is looking all sad. Just the way I like to see this jerk. And a little post about him. Not mentioning that one of his brothers quit going to church because of the abolitionist sermons, etc., etc. I hate the McCormicks. There are some good people in that family, but... Well, we just went here on a time travel pub crawl, so we'll just stop in briefly. The Carryman was once the Liberty Inn. Here they are looking as though they were being a family-friendly organization. Even though they were one of the places that was still most openly selling liquor during Prohibition. Dean O'Banion, the head of the North Side Mob, got his start as a singing waiter there. And here's some of their less family-friendly stuff. Later in the 1980s, this became a punk club called O'Banion's, named after Dean. Everybody seemed to think at the time that Dean O'Banion had been shot at this place. That was actually a few blocks away. But here there is actually some confirmation from right after he died that he did in fact work there as a singing waiter. Under those days, he was called Gimpy O'Banion. People were really not polite back then. Let's move around. A little past the Jenga building. Down here on Wells. Yeah, Eleanor, that new biography of Edith Rockefeller McCormick is really interesting. They kind of downplay her psychic stuff. But here we have the Prosecco. Let's look like next door to this. Next door, you see to the left those little green ornamentation things over on the side. This is the old Sparbaro Funeral Home. Now, Sparbaro was run by a guy named John Sparbaro, who was... They got a shot of him here, I think. John Sparbaro, who was not only a funeral director, he was also an assistant state's attorney during Prohibition, and a racketeer during Prohibition as well. The guy had his hand in a lot of different businesses. You got to diversify, you know. But this became really the go-to funeral home for the mob back in the 1920s, especially after Dean O'Banion's funeral was held here. We just talked about O'Banion a second ago. This is a picture of the crowd outside. Somewhere inside Two Gun Altery was loudly challenging whoever shot Dean O'Banion to a duel right out on State Street. This is Vinny the Schemer Drucci's funeral with a large sign that says VD. That was his initials, not how he died, but check it out here. Over on the side, on the end, you can see those little green lights. And those are still there today. Now, in 1928, John Sparbaro got bombed. It was all part of a big gambling war. That's the thing. He was an assistant state's attorney, so he was going up against the mob, also working with the mob. You were going to make a lot of enemies in a job like this. Here it is looking all bombed out on the inside. But once again, on the facade there's that green light. Let's move it a little bit closer on these things, just so you can see exactly what I'm pointing at. This is a genuine Prohibition relic. There's a lot of stories about those things. And I can't say 100% for sure that these are the original ones that were actually there in the 1920s. If not, they're a very good replica. And just across the street from here, just across the corner on Wells, this is one of those cool old buildings where you could rent space really cheap in the 1970s. And in fact, in the late 1970s, a group of Sun-Times reporters got together and opened a bar here called The Mirage. The name possibly should have been a clue. Here they are in living color. And you can see on the side there, you can see that it's the same building. See over on the left-hand side there, you can match it up to these same turrets. But the reason that they opened the Mirage in this place was not to make money running a bar. It was to find out exactly how many people came up and asked them for bribes. How many laws could they cheat? How many rules could they get around by giving the right person just a few bucks? Turned out to be quite a lot. The one inspector came, found all of these leaky ceilings. For about $10, he looked the other way. They actually got a picture of the fire inspector smoking a cigarette while he collected his graft. Now, what they generally found was the accountants would say, okay, you're going to need 2 books, here's how you do this. The people like fire inspectors would come in and just take a small amount. It was just like $5 or $10 at a time. They worked on what they called the supermarket system of graft. Low cost, high volume. So this place was in operation just about 2 months and uncovered all kinds of payoffs, tax cheats, the payoff parade. Mirage clears fire inspection for $10 with all of those leaky ceilings. This was a huge expose. It won the Sun-Times quite a lot of awards and eventually led to a lot of changes in laws. It's a lot harder to get away with this kind of stuff nowadays. How am I on time here? We'll move over to the side one bit here. Let's just check out one more. Currently the Harry Carey's location, still the best chicken Vesuvio in town. But this is built into an old Chicago Varnish Company building. It goes way back in the day. Kind of what they would call the Dutch Revival style, designed by Henry Ives Cobb once again. But this thing has been through a lot. It was a varnish factory for a long time. Now it's a classy restaurant. I haven't been there in a long time. I should really go to Harry Carey's again. But lately they've started really pushing the fact that for a while there in the 1920s and 30s, it was owned by Frank the Enforcer Nitti, the guy who eventually took over for Capone, or tried to with limited success. Back down in the basement, they've even set up a whole little speakeasy in honor of him, including an old vault where they found things like record books. Nothing of that much research value that I know of. It was more marketing value than anything else, as it tends to be when you find an actual mob connection. Though they will tell you that Capone hung out in this place because it offered a view of the courthouse down the road. This is just down the corner. You can see it out the window. Not well enough that I think Capone would think it was a really great score. But this is the old criminal court building. The version that was on the spot before, Mary Todd Lincoln had her insanity trial. They brought her in and said, okay, you're being put on trial for your insanity. No time to prepare. We've been preparing for this trial for a while, but we're just going to railroad you right in. Now, I can't imagine, based on the transcripts of it and reports, that anybody would have voted to acquit, but she was absolutely railroaded in any case. Before that, it was the site of the Market Square where Senator Douglas came to promote his new Kansas-Nebraska Act that would have allowed slavery to expand into new territories. He was roundly pelted with vegetables and then said, oh, they were trying to, talking about how oppressed he was. We'll move up here a little bit. Now, River North had its day. In the 1970s, it was known as about the cheapest neighborhood in town. It was full of strip clubs and sex shops. Just a couple of them were still surviving. Like we used to get stuck on Clark Street on the Ghost Tour bus right outside of this one place. It was not TJ's Adult Bookstore, which is right here, but it was someplace just about like that. And we would make some jokes. Yeah, this is the Haunted Adult Bookstore. We do lots of investigations at the Haunted Adult Bookstore. And Hector and I had this whole routine. One of those things that I thought was an obvious joke about the ghost of a stripper who lost her leg in some kind of horrible shuffleboard accident. Then eventually her leg was put on display, was making more money than she was. Then eventually she wrote to P.T. Barnum to get it back, and he said, honey, if you want that thing back, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg. But I was learning some valuable lessons about this. I thought it was obviously a joke, but one time I was with Weird Chicago Tours. They were doing a sex tour that actually went inside that building. I went up to the manager and said, hey, I don't suppose you ever had anybody coming in here asking for a one-legged stripper ghost? And he said, actually, yes. That's happened quite a bit. And we always thought it was weird because we do have a ghost here. It's just not that ghost. You can't even make up a ghost story in this city. But anyway, across the street of the courthouse, I don't even know which story to tell here. Leopold and Loeb had their trial here. Terrible Tommy O'Connor had his trial here. Right behind it would have been the prison that he escaped from. Johann Hawk put on trial in here back in 1905. Al Capone, not put on trial here, but we can trace him to this building because he did have a meeting with a lawyer, a state's attorney, who did have an office in this building. And if you look on the inside, this is the lobby right now. Now and then I can get people into the lobby, but it's just kind of luck of the draw. There's no way I could arrange it. But this is a portrait of Adolf Lutgert, the sausage killer. He ran the Lutgert sausage factory until his wife disappeared. Now, he didn't boil her up into sausage, which makes this a very difficult story to tell. If you mention sausage and murder, people expect somebody to get eaten. But her body was just boiled down in a sausage-curing vat. That's all. They probably continued making sausages in the vat after cleaning it out, but they did, I believe, clean it out. They've also got a big portrait of Terrible Tommy O'Connor in this place. Now, Terrible Tommy was arrested and acquitted and arrested and escaped and arrested and got away over and over again. They finally managed to pin a murder on him. He was just about to be executed, but then he escaped and was never seen again in late 1921. For years, they had to keep the gallows down in the basement of the jail because his sentence said he must hang by the neck until he was dead. So if they ever caught him, by God, they were going to hang him by his neck until he was dead. Some people honestly believe they would do it out back behind the old courthouse. And for a long time, any reporter who needed to work off a hangover or something would just tell his editor, I got a hot tip on where terrible Tommy O'Connor is. I'm going to need a day to follow this lead. Then, of course, he'd come back the next day and say, nope, turned out to be nothing, but I had to follow that lead. Every reporter used it at one point or another back in the 50s and 60s. All right, that takes us up to 8:45. So, all right, I want a quick plug. Next week's tour is going to be Treason, the 1864 Chicago insurrection plot. I realize it's been about a year or over a year since I've done that one. But I really enjoyed that one. It's such an incredible story, so many wild personalities in it. And I don't like to say that the past holds a mirror up to our times, but, sometimes it's hard not to. May 6th, Sunday at 7 p.m. It is May 6th, right? Let me check on that. I should really know this better off the top of my head. Yes, May 6th, 7 p.m., the next walking tour is going to be the Dark History on Taylor Street tour. You can get tickets for that at adamchicago.com. First time in about 2 years that we've done that one. And with that, everybody, I will just put the Benny Goodman back on, put up this thanks sign here. Thanks to everybody who has been signing up all this time. It was everybody on the Venmo, the Patreon especially. Everybody who's continued to hit me up on Venmo and PayPal all this time. Also, Cash App Mysterious Chicago. So thanks a lot, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago, and here is Benny Goodman. All right. Sorry, my nose has been stuffed the last couple of days. Just allergy stuff. But man. Yeah, May 6th, Saturday. Taking this weekend off, which I say is a good deal because it's going to be raining. I've really been picking some winners weather-wise so far this year for the walking tours. Man, yeah, I'm sure there were lots of reasons Lowry's closed. But they specifically cited Black Lives Matter protests as the reason. I always feel like the ghost of Leander Hamilton McCormick talked him into that one. Oh yes, Romeoville. On the 12th, I will be doing a talk at the library of Graceland Cemetery. Yeah, Mandy, I hope somebody else can come up with something cool to do with that building. Oh, speaking of, tomorrow I should be able to do Find a Grave Friday on time. That is my plan. Yeah, Romeoville will be May 12th at the library. Check the library's website there. Is Priya here? I don't know where Priya is right now. She's probably in the bedroom. I don't always plug the library stuff because the libraries want it to be for their patrons, and so if I plug it on here, they just get a bunch of Mysterians from all over, which is great for me. Gary, the Ed DeBevics was nearby the Hooters. It's not the same space. But I think they have now moved to Michigan Avenue. Off the record, I'm over for a couple of Venmo hits today. There's a number I need on Venmo that's very close to it. Gary, did people really dance on countertops a lot in the 50s? I did eat at Devevix many times. Do libraries tend to buy my books after a show? Sometimes. Donna, I'm not sure what time, probably 7 o'clock. I'm very bad at keeping track of what I'm doing at libraries. Sometimes I have to read the flyer when I get there just to see what presentation I'm doing. Ryan, I have never seen Assassins. I know of it, of course.
Down Harlem Way, they're all trucking. And here's Helen Ward to tell you all about her. Trucking.
Oh, 6:30 to 8. Okay. Well, I'll be there very early anyway. Yeah, tomorrow night will be whiskey and a cookie. That's 7 o'clock on the Patty Vasquez Show Facebook page. Shame there hasn't been, any news this week that we could talk about. Or any new television to watch. And Donnie, yes, it'll be in the evening. With cocktails. I gotta go easy on the cocktails. I gotta drive up to Wisconsin that night. Pass through Joliet, get some Rack's restaurant. If that's on the way. I don't think it's on the way, though.
We had to have someone new, a dancer duo here in Harlem. So someone started trucking.
Miles has made his appearance already, but I'm going to go find him again. Yeah. Gary, I see the idiots in Montana are doing the same thing that the idiots in Tennessee did. Nobody knows who state house reps are. Most people don't know their own state house reps, let alone ever hear of anybody else's. And in Tennessee, by trying to expel those guys, not only did they accomplish nothing, as they all just got reinstated, but they made them into brands. Now Montana is trying to do the same thing by expelling a transgender legislator. Nobody had ever heard of her before. Now she's a hero. This happens every time, guys.
Benny Goodman presents On the Alamo.
Not to say I'm encouraging them to do it more, because it's a shitty thing to do. Dave and Barb, I'm going on an effing Chicago field trip. We're having a group outing. I had never heard of any Tennessee State House rep. Now I have made prank phone calls to several of them, and 3 of them are now heroes. We never should have pulled Union troops out of the South in 1877. Those Tennessee guys should still have Union soldiers making sure they wash their hands after they go to the bathroom. Carol Aiden's doing fine. Dinner plans are moving slowly.
Eeny, meeny, miny, moe, and
Getting
we
his
stay
hair
right in
all
the
over my
Urban
sweater.
Congress Hotel in Chicago and dance some more to Benny Goodman and his orchestra, and hear Helen Ward sing Eeny, meeny, miny, moe.
Am I back on my shot schedule? Yeah, I'm back on my. I missed an allergy shot by going by having a flight canceled. Okay, there's lots of old pictures of me there. Miles is a meower early in the morning, not as much this time of day. This time of day is pretty quiet.
Eeny, miny, moe, catch a double by the toe. If the dollars let it go, let it fly away. Eeny, meeny, miny, moe, it's the saying high and low. Hear it everywhere you go, any time of day. Big Ben rings it, Valley sings it, Wiseman swings it, even Mr. Crosby bings it. Eeny, meeny, miny, moe, catch the trouble by the toe. If the dollars let it go, let it fly away.
Hey, buddy. Ow. Okay, Miles, that hurt. Gotta watch those claws, buddy. You need your nails trimmed. Alright, I'm making a horrible mess of my stuff up here.
And we'll let the title speak for itself. Benny Goodman presenting Madhouse.
But alright, everybody, thanks a lot for joining me today. I should be able to do Find a Grave Friday on schedule tomorrow. There's a thing going on, so maybe not, but I'll try to give you a warning either way. But alright, thanks everybody for joining me. I will see you tomorrow morning for another mini tour. Next week for another virtual tour. And a couple of days after that for Dark History on Taylor Street, the first time in about 2 years. So until then, everybody, just be sure that you stay spooky. Have a good night, everybody.